So, start off with, when were you born?
December the 15th, 1938.
1938. Where were you born?
716 North Jackson in Danville, Illinois.
All right. You remember how old your parents were when you were born?
Both of them were 20 years old, I guess. They were born in 18 and I was born in 38, so 20 years old.
Do you have any memories of growing up in your hometown?
I have some. One of the bad ones was I had a dog named Spot got hit by a car up front of our house. That made me real mad.
How old were you when that happened?
Well, I had to be before I was 6 years old because we moved from there to South Bend, Indiana, and stayed there for 6 years. So I was probably 5.
What kind of dog was?
It was a good spotted dog.
I see.
In those days, not many people bought dogs. This was a dog I got from someone else.
Did you have other animals growing up?
Once upon a time, I had a baby rabbit. This was in South Bend. I had a baby rabbit, and I don't recall. Oh, I think what I had him in a crate, and I had a screen over the top of it, and I think he jumped and hit the screen, and knocked the brick loose that was holding it and killed him. So that wasn't good. Then I don't know where I got it, but I had an alligator that was probably total of about, I don't know, a little over 12 inches long. And he bit my dad and on the finger, and so he took a hike.
Where did you ever come across an alligator?
I don't know. I was between 5 and 10 years old at that time. Sometime, probably about 8 years old when that happened. But people get animals from pet stores and stuff. Somebody may have given it to me because their parents wouldn't let them keep it.
And what did you like to do as a kid before high school?
Probably mostly just playing. When I was in 7th grade, I got to play basketball and football. So I enjoyed that. I liked that. Didn't grow up big enough to play it in high school, but I did play in grade school.
And back then that would have been junior high?
Essentially, yeah. 7th, 8th grade, yeah. I just found out recently that my homeroom teacher and football coach, his son, the school that I went to was Garfield Elementary, and they renamed it Wayne Denman. And so I was the son of the Denman that was my teacher and coach.
So you didn't play sports in high school. What did you do in high school?
Well, I only went 2 years. I had a part-time job all the time. Part of that was I didn't have parents at home. My mother was dead. My dad was incarcerated, and my grandmother didn't have a lot of income, and some of that was I helped with some of that.
So you were raised by your grandmother?
From the time I was 11, when my mother died, until she couldn't catch me anymore. She and I helped around the house some, but not a tremendous amount that I can remember. I remember cutting the grass with a lawnmower, push mower, and stuff like that. But I also remember looking for places to shovel snow off the sidewalks, and I had a paper route, and then I got a job in a gas station. I worked at a lunch counter for a period of time while I was in school, and I would go there when I got out for lunch and work, and then I would get my lunch for free. So I did work in the school cafeteria a short time, but I didn't like that, so I worked in the lunchroom off campus. And no, I didn't have time to pursue sports in high school. I did later on after I got in the service, but for a while. Played softball, played basketball. Tried out for football on one team, but I wasn't big enough to play with the big guys.
And you have siblings? You have a sibling?
Have one brother. He's 2.5 years younger than I am.
And did he work also? Did he help pay the bills?
No, 2.5 years old, younger than I was, and by the time actually I was there till I finished my sophomore year in high school. I had a job as a mechanic in a garage, and I worked one summer before that. I worked in a canning factory in Milford, Illinois, and then I worked for a guy in a garage there in Milford, and then I worked for a guy in Danville for probably 6 months. Then I went to Kentucky to see my uncle ordained as a Baptist minister or preacher. So did not. I had a drafting teacher. We have vocational ed in high school as well as college prep. And you had 6 exploratory shops: machine shop, woodworking, drafting, mechanics, several others. And my drafting teacher, I told him I was going to quit school, and he said, if you quit, join the Air Force. And when you go to take the test, they'll do skill tests. When you take the test, tell them what you want is drafting, drafting, drafting. You have 3 choices. So I did that. And the counselor that I was talking to wrote down ground radio, ground radio, ground radio. And I said, wait a minute, you told me I qualified for anything that I wanted. And I didn't say ground radio. But he said, the needs of the service come first. So I got into electronics. After I came back from Kentucky, I joined the Air Force, and then went to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio for basic training. Went back to Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, near St. Louis, for tech school. And then my next duty station was Yuma, Arizona. When I went to tech school, 60 was honors grade. I got a 59. So instead of getting my first choice like they tell you that you get, I put Alaska, and then I put Hawaii for my second choice. I don't remember my third choice, but I didn't go to Alaska either. I went to Yuma, Arizona. Stayed in Yuma for 1.5 years. They shipped me out to Canada, and I stayed up there for a year. And then I came back to Albuquerque, Kirtland Air Force Base, spent 5 years there. During that time, I kind of got trapped. I met a young lady named Twala Davis, and we started dating. And at the end of 2 months, we'd seen enough. We got married. So it was quicker than planned because her grandmother died and she wanted me to go with them to the funeral. But they didn't have sufficient rooms for everybody. So we decided to go ahead and get married. And so we got married. Pastor at Crestview Baptist Church in Albuquerque married us, and he would not marry us unless we went to counseling. We had a few days, and so we got counseled and married. Later on, when I came back to the Air Force Base to ask for financial help for quarters for married service people, commander called me in. He said, did you talk to the chaplain? I said, no. He said, you know, I can turn you down on quarters. And I said, yes, sir. I didn't know that, but you're the commander. So he said, you go see the chaplain and come back to see me. So I went to see the chaplain, and the most advice that the chaplain gave me was, you've heard that marriage is 50-50. It's not. It's 90-10. Guess who's giving the most? So anyway, after that, I went back, got allotted. I got the quarters allowance that I applied for. I'm answering questions you didn't ask.
No, that's good. That's fine. That's how this is going to work anyway. It's not.
Okay.
So you met in what year? What year did you get
1961 is when we met.
married? And you got married in 61.
Yes.
And so how many years have you been married?
Be 58 in August. And that's doesn't have a lot to do with us. God's kept us together.
Amen. Well, going back to your parents, I guess yours is a unique situation. Are there any? How have you benefited from your parents in one way or another?
Well, one of the things that I can remember, my dad worked hard, and he worked long hours. We moved to South Bend. He went to work for Studebaker Corporation, and they had a policy about buying a vehicle and getting a discount, but you were supposed to keep it 90 days before you sold it. And during the time that he was there, he was a steward for the union, and he bought a car from my uncle, the one I went to Kentucky to see, and he went ahead and wrote the title over to his brother, and they laid him off for 90 days, I think, or 30 days, whatever it was. And he started a welding business and as a mechanic in a garage where we were living in South Bend. Took my family back to show them where I lived in South Bend once. It was a parking lot for a trucking outfit. So, but the school that I went to was still there. And as a first grader, as I was going into the school, it was kindergarten through high school, or not kindergarten, first grade through high school. They didn't have kindergarten when I was a kid. So there was a typing class. All the girls were typing, and they had the keys covered so you couldn't see the keys. And so I was looking in, and they got me to come in and showed me how to type my name on that typewriter without being able to see the keys. And I thought that was cool.
That's interesting.
My mother, I got a paper route in South Bend for the Chicago Herald-American that no longer exists. In fact, it's been out of business for a lot of years. But I I had gotten a bicycle for Christmas, and it was, of course, it was a used bicycle. It wasn't a brand new one, but it had chrome fenders and it was painted black. And I got a big basket to put on the front of it so that I could carry the papers. And I made money doing that, but I had one experience that not everybody knows about, and that is one day going down the alley, there's some black kids playing rolling dice in a garage, and I stopped to watch, and it cost me most of my money. But I learned. I didn't do that anymore. My mother told me one time to do something, and I said, "You can't make me because I can outrun you." And she said, "No, you can't." And I said, "Yes, I can." And she said, "Well, if I catch you, I'm going to whip you." I said, "If you don't catch me, you got to buy ice cream." She caught me. But she didn't hurt me bad.
So what do you think it helped you the most as far as getting through what happened with your parents and just being able to stay on the right track and work hard and get where you needed to get?
I'm not sure what instilled work ethic in me, but shortly after my mother died, I was playing with a boy named Johnny Brandenberger. His dad was a doctor. They lived 6 or 8 blocks from where I lived, but theirs was a high rent district. When we were up at Johnny's playing basketball. And I don't recall why, but anyway, she must call us in for some cookies or something. And she was talking to me and she said, "Danny, you're going to get advice. Everybody in the world is going to tell you what to do. And the best thing you can do is listen to all of it. And then you decide for yourself what's best." And I pretty much followed that. I don't always listen anymore because I'm old enough it doesn't matter anymore. But I did listen to just most of the people. Like the captain, years later, he was a reserve captain in the Air Force that told me to go into drafting. He was a teacher. And as he did that, it was advice that I listened to, and it helped. And I was sitting not long ago thinking back about things. God's been guiding me all the time. He's been lifting me up. But everything that I've started and tried, I've excelled. Went to work at a printing company in Danville, printing S&H green stamps and gold bond stamps, all those stamps. And the guy I was working with, I was watching the stamps come out of the press, and if they were off, you had to stop it and correct it. So we were working together, working well, and you get a bonus if you exceed your quota. And we always made our quota. And after a while, he started letting me do the job that he was doing, and he'd sit down there and do the job I was doing, which got me prepared to be that. So he moved on to another press, and they said, you want to try that job? I said, sure. So 2 days later, I think it was, the union rep came and said, hey, you haven't joined the union yet. And I said, I wasn't going to join the union. Oh, son, that's a union job that you're on now. You got to join the union. And I said, oh, I don't think so. He said, why don't you come down to Union Hall and see what we do? And so I went down there, and they played pinball machines and slot machines and drank beer and griped about their employers. So I said, I don't want to do that. So another week went by, and the plant manager came by and saw me and said, let's go have a coffee. So I went and had a coffee with him, and he said, son, you're going to have to join the union or they're going to shut my plant down. And I said, how much time do I have? And he said, a week. And I said, I'll just find another job. So I did. So, I've not felt good about unions the rest of my life. And that's the reason why. So, but that's just another experience that I've had. When I went into the Air Force, I told you about my technical situation. When I went to Canada, when I went to Yuma, Arizona, the first one, I was on a night shift, and you have certain things you do and checking equipment and everything. And I'd go check something that wouldn't be right, and it'd say, see your supervisor. So I went to see my supervisor, and I said, I'm not learning anything with this. Where do I find out what to do? And so he showed me, or found books for me to use, and I found the tech manuals that I needed to change it, to fix things. And so my next duty assignment was in Canada, and it was under the command of NORAD, North American Defense. The site was going SAGE, semi-automatic ground environment, so the equipment is controlled and used by NORAD headquarters in Colorado. So the equipment wasn't up to snuff. I knew how to get it up to snuff. And so I got the job of supervising that as well as doing it. So when I came back to Albuquerque, we went into another shop. There's different kinds of radios there. I learned those and excel there. They offered me a job, or offered to take me to Christmas Island. I didn't have to go because I'd been remote in Canada. So then they said, well, you want to stay in this command or go to the systems command? Went to a different command on Kirtland at the same base. And essentially I took over that place because nobody was doing anything. And when I went in and saw that there was things to do, I did them. That's the first place I got rated as a #1. And I talked to the lieutenant that rated me, and I said, yeah, I don't know everything. There's so much I don't know. He said, it isn't what you know, it's what you do and how you do that compared with the people that you work with and the job that you're in. So that was the first time I ever did that, but that was enlightening, but it was kind of humbling too, for me. Went to Germany. They wanted to know if they were trying to build a team to go to Southeast Asia in 64, 65. My brother had already spent time in Laos when he was in the Army. And so they wanted to build a 15-man team, and they didn't get it done in time, so I didn't have to go to that. Otherwise, I'd have been there. After that, he came down and said, how about a 3-year tour in Germany accompanied with your family? So I talked to my family, and by that time, Danny was born and Deanna was just a baby. So decided we would go. I said, no matter what job I get, I'm not likely to take a family and go to Germany for 3 years or go to Europe for 3 years. So we went, and we had, most of the time I would get weekends off and we'd see Germany and go through a lot of places. My mother-in-law came over. We took a trip to Italy, to Rome, and when I went over there, I took a 60 Plymouth and I sold it to an Army guy that wanted it. It was fast, and especially compared to the underpowered vehicles they had back then in Europe. And so I went and bought a van, a microbus, that needed an engine. So I got it cheap, bought the engine, and me and one of my buddies swapped the engine out, and took that with Vi and Danny and Deanna and Swalla, and went to Rome. I think we were in Verona, Italy, and I broke a push rod in the engine. So I took it into the shop, and sure enough, it was guaranteed. So, hey, no, it's okay. It's okay. No. I'm going to cover you up if you don't be quiet. Good. Be a good girl. Good girl. So we spent a night in the van on an Air Force base, and I think it was Deanna got eat up with mosquito bites, but we were fortunate that nothing beyond itching occurred. So, and we got to Rome. I found a hotel just outside of Vatican City. It was a room about the size of this room, and it had a sink, a a sink you wash your hands and face in. Down the hall was a shower, and next door was the toilet. But it was the coldest shower I've ever taken in my life. I think it's just well water. I don't think they heated it at all. And this was, by the way, about a 4-star hotel. I mean, it was, I don't remember the cost, but it was well known, and it was convenient, and it was close to Vatican City. So, and we took a tour through the Vatican. I remember as we followed the crowd, they got to a statue called the Pieta. And at sometime recently before that, I had read The Agony and the Ecstasy about Michelangelo, who painted and sculpted. And so when I got to the Pieta, I remembered reading about it, and I'm standing there looking at it. The crowd keeps going. I had to go catch up with them. And then later I found out that Pieta that I was looking at was a copy. The real Pieta was in New York World's Fair. So, but I saw it anyway. It's very impressive to see the work that's been done through the hundreds of years. While I was stationed in Germany, I had a guy that worked on the same kind of equipment that I did. He was more experienced, he was old, and he was an alcoholic. But he could tune the radios for maximum output power, and I learned how from him to do beyond what the books allow you to do. And then it was a tactical outfit, and basically what our job was is we had a base, but we were mobile, and they, at least once a year, they would call us out to go to the field someplace and set up. So you had to tear down your mobile outfit, pack it up, move it, and then get someplace and set it up. And I saw ways to improve the speed and efficiency of doing that. So I was in charge of the mobile outfit. The base unit stayed there. I heard about people getting direct commissions, direct appointment to the commission in the Army. So I applied for one. I applied for captain. I didn't want to be a lieutenant or a lieutenant, second lieutenant or first lieutenant. So I applied for it. A few weeks later, the captain or commander of the Army unit that was there came to see my commander, and they called me in. And he said, "You're already 28, and I can't give you the direct commission, a direct appointment." but I can give you a chief warrant officer, and then in 6 months I can promote you to captain. I had written to my brother and told him that I was trying to do that. He wrote back to me quickly and said, "Don't do it. You'll be flying choppers in Vietnam in 3 months." So if I'd have taken the commission. But, and it's funny, I had never thought about Vietnam while I was in Germany. When I left Germany, went back to Tucson to a SAC outfit. And I talked to the captain that I was working for there, and he said, "Can you do this?" And I said, "Yes, sir." "What about this?" "Yes, sir." "What about this?" "Yes, sir." I said, "Sir, I can do anything you want for 15 months and I'm getting out." And he laughed and he said, "You won't get out. You already got 12 years in." So I said, "Well, we'll see." At any rate, I took over the shop that he put me in a shop that had problems, never had passed an inspection. And we were evaluated by a strategic missile evaluation squadron out of California. They would come and inspect and find out what you were doing, good and bad. This particular shop had never passed. So they put me in that shop, and we made some improvements, got some things working better. And they asked me, well, I had an incident. I wasn't in charge of the unit. I was like second in charge or third in charge. But I had guys that I assigned duties to. And one of them missed. He didn't get up and go. And I reamed him. And the guy that was in charge outranked me by a stripe, and he came over and told the guy, after I got through chewing him out, he came over and told the guy, he said, "You know, it's okay, you're going to be fine, don't worry about it." And so I had words with him right then. I said, "Don't you ever try to make up for something I've done and the way I've done it." So I think what happened is the word got back to the captain. But anyway, he came in with a senior master sergeant that worked for him. And he said, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm fine." He said, "You making any progress?" I said, "I've done about as much as I can." He said, "Why is that?" I said, "Because I don't own it. I'm not in charge." So he said, "You are now." And he said, "What do you want?" I said, "The tech sergeant's got to go, this other staff sergeant's got to go. And if the other guy wants to stay, he can." So I took over that shop, and in probably less than 6 months, we got it in shape where we could pass. I had guys going out to a missile site to fix a communications issue. They couldn't communicate from one level. They could only go up so many levels. They couldn't get past that with the communication gear. So I sent what I thought was the best guy that we had and detoured him from another site to go over there and fix it. An hour went by after he got there and he didn't know what was wrong. So I jumped in the truck and went out there. And in 15 minutes I found the problem and fixed it. The guys respected me after that. I mean, when I said it was do this, do that, they knew that I knew what I was talking about. And that's what I'm talking about, God leading me through some of these things. And after I got out of the Air Force, I'll share more about that. But anyway, I had one of the inspectors come and ask me, he said, "What are you guys hiding?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "These guys are answering questions they never did before." I said, "I just told them, you guys are here to help us, not to hurt us. You're here to make sure that we're doing it the right way so things work right. That's what I think your job is, and that's what I've told them." We passed to the inspection first time. So then they came to me and said, "Will you take over nuclear safety training?" It didn't make it either. And we had a 30-year staff sergeant running it. And I said, "Well, I'll do it, but I got a couple of conditions. One, you got to send me to nuke safety school in Fort Worth." and 2, Cummings has got to go. I don't want him in the training organization because he's not helping. So we said, okay. So I came to Fort Worth, went through nuke safety training school, took a couple of days off, went and interviewed at IBM and tested, and then went back to Tucson. I got word that I was fine. They didn't have a job for me right now. I wasn't out yet, but that's word I got. And then after I got word that I did a good job, there was the safety training. We passed it. In order for me to do it, they gave me time off to take my wife and kids back to Albuquerque and get started moving them, so that I would be there right till the last minute. Another little scare that I had was my discharge physical. They called me and said, you need to come back for the x-rays again. And I said, why? And they said, well, the doctor said so. I said, tell the doctor I want to know why, but I'm not coming. So they said, well, there's scars that they want to look at in your lungs. One of the guys that I knew had, within months, had been on the operating table in Fort Simmons in Colorado, and died on the operating table from some sort of cancer. But I said, okay, here I come. And they turned me every angle they could get to check. They said there were pneumonia scars, so it wasn't cancer, obviously, because I'm still here. But again, God's in control. Got out of the Air Force, did not have a job, went by Horn Oil Company. Well, I went by, first of all, I don't remember, I guess a salesman came out to see Vi, and he said, why don't you come to work for me? So I went to work for John Hancock. And I made some appointments and got some commission sales made, but I couldn't sign them. I mean, I couldn't actually be the salesman on them because I wasn't licensed yet. And before I got licensed, I went by Horn Oil Company, and they had 2 groups. They had a group that took care of several of the service stations, and then they had another group that took care of the real estate that they had. So I was trying to sell insurance to the guy, and one of the owners, H.B. Horn, said, why don't you come see me? And I said, okay. I thought I was going to sell him insurance. We met him at his motel restaurant, and he said, why don't you come to work for me? I had worked for them part-time while I was in the Air Force, stationed there before. And I said, HB, I don't know if you'll pay me enough, that's one. And the second one is, I've applied for a job at IBM, and if IBM calls me, I'm probably going to go. And so I went to work for them. The only thing that's bad about it is you get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning, they've had a break-in or a fight at one of the gas stations, and you've got to get up and go. But they treated me right, Horn did. But then IBM called, and HB told me, he said, son, don't let money be the difference. And I said, it isn't, it's electronics. I'm doing something I really like. So I went to work for IBM. They called, and I said, well, I don't recall if I volunteered or if they had a physical on me, but had a hernia, which I knew when I got out of the service. And I could have had it fixed in the service, or I could have waited and get it done outside in the VA. So I did it in the VA. And then stayed there in Albuquerque and did some preschool work, and then went from Albuquerque to Endicott, New York for basic training. And then came back to Albuquerque, moved my family to Dallas, and went to work for IBM there. So all of these things God's led me through, but you don't think about that when you're doing it. You're thinking about we're getting there, we're getting a little better, things are getting a little better. But when you stop and think about it, I wasn't as good as I think I was. God was. I fixed machines that I had no training on. Fixed customer situations that I did not know the customers. Just common sense, most of it, but God was doing it. What really taught me one time, John Kane was one of the best customer engineers that IBM's had. And when I first went to work, they paired me up with him and said, "You ride with John." And John would fix anything. It didn't matter what it was. If you put him in there, he'd fix anything. So we were going, and there was a particular model of tape drive that they had difficulty with the power supplies. But the engineering of the thing was difficult too. And sure as the world, when you go in to fix one with a power problem, you get the wrong diodes. And John knew how to figure it out. Well, we went to this one and he said, "Okay, see what you can do." I figured it out and fixed it. And so he called the boss and said, "He don't need to ride with me. Give him something to do." And then later on, John, guys call each other and say, "Let's go eat lunch, have lunch and stuff." I finished up one place, went over where John was at, and he was working on a machine and was having some problems finding the problem. And just kind of popped in my head what we were looking at, and I told him, I said, "Check that." And we found it. And I thought to myself, you don't even know the machine. You didn't do that. God did it. He showed you to do that. So, took over Southland Corporation as their customer engineer on site. They had trouble. They had managers in there daily. And not just the field manager. They sometimes had the branch manager in there giving them grief. They asked me if I would go. Well, they didn't ask me. They assigned it to me. And I went in, found out what the problems were, talked to the people to see what they needed for me to do. Got them started and got things finished, and things were running smooth. My boss walked in one day and said, "Hi," and their boss looked at him and said, "What's up, John? What do you want?" And he said, "Well, I just wanted to see how things are going." He said, "Going fine. I don't need to talk to you anymore." And they didn't. They kept, until I left there, they were still running smooth. They moved to a new location and put new equipment in. We still got by the same way. I didn't do that. I never had any management training or anything at that point. I was doing what God led me to do. I think I was trying to remember. Some friends of the family I don't remember why we visited them or if they visited the family, someplace, Vi or somebody. Anyway, he worked for the FAA, and he asked me what I did, and I told him in the Air Force. And so he said, and I told him some of the things that I did. And he told Twala, if he's as good as he thinks he is, he'll go a long way. God's brought me a long way. And it isn't that so much what I knew, it's that I depend on God when I need Him. And I need Him all the time. So, don't know of any questions we've answered yet.
Well, Are there? This says 3. Okay, so let's go with 3. What 3 events shaped your life? Most shaped your life?
My mother's death was one. I'd say my marriage to my wife, and then my kid's birth. I had one other one in there before I married my wife. When I went to Kentucky to see my uncle get ordained as a Baptist preacher, about 6 weeks into it, sitting in the back row with all the teenage kids, the guys, I'd look up at the preacher who was a 19-year-old preacher in Kentucky, and he was looking right at me. And it made me mad. My uncle had told him I wasn't saved. He convinced me after we got home, after I blew up in the car on the way home, he convinced me that he had not told the preacher, and if I wanted him to, he'd like to call the preacher and have him come down and visit with me. So Harold Mears came down to the farmhouse and visited with me, and explained the plan of salvation, and I accepted Christ there, but I professed it publicly that night at church. So that's probably the most significant thing that happened to me. But the things, we were in Germany. We got married, and then we stayed at Crestview. Brother Sewell was the preacher there. And I don't know how long we were there, but it wasn't too long. And they elected me as a training union director. And I knew very little about training. I knew very little about the Bible. But Brother Sewell saw something and he put it to me. And I'm trying to remember at the time, the time of a couple of events. But I told you I worked part-time for the Horn Oil Company while I was there in Albuquerque stationed at Kirtland. Well, one night the guys were going to get together and play penny ante poker, and the girls were going to get together and go to a movie. Well, my wife didn't know the girls, and she didn't want to go to the movie. I went and played poker. She called Brother Sewell, said, he's out there playing poker. Brother Sewell called me, said he'd like to see me. So I went and see him, and he said, son, you're going to have to make a choice. You can go do things of the world, or you can work in the church. You can't do both. So I quit playing penny ante poker, and I told him, but I was winning. So that was another thing that happened while we were in Albuquerque. 6 weeks after we got married, they sent me to the Nevada test site. Took a team of guys up there and set up ground-to-air communications for the nuclear testing sampling. Russia had broken the testing moratorium that they had, and so we were going to start up, and they needed the communications with the aircraft that were going in. So I took a team up there, and first thing I did was we set up one rack down in the command headquarters, and I took an antenna on my belt, climbed a pole that was already had pegs in it, and put the antenna on and hooked it up on top of that pole. And by the time I got down, there was a union guy that ran the site that was chewing me up something bad, till there was a lieutenant colonel that was in charge of the Air Force there. He come out and got the guy off my back, and he told me, he said, son, you gotta be careful, because they'll shut this place down too. I couldn't believe that a union company could shut down an installation. He said they could. But anyway, we got by with that. everything worked fine. And I didn't have to go back to take it down when we finished with it, because that's when I changed over different commands. But while I was up there for several weeks, or a couple of months at least, every weekend I get to come home to see my wife. And I fly on a C-47 with the crew there. One weekend I had to help him change a fuel pump on it so we could go. And then one weekend I rode with a tech sergeant that had a Dodge, I think it was a Dodge Charger station wagon, but something like that anyway. He drove fast, so we made it pretty good too. Joe LaPoma got attached to a frame in a hangar. We didn't know about the U-2s being in the hangars, but we were sent over to install a radio in a hangar. There's 3 of us. I don't remember Lane's first name. I remember LaPoma and me went. And a civilian electrician had hooked up the frame. He hooked it up wrong. The frame was hot, and it was 220 or 230. Joe got his hand wrapped up in that, and he was getting electrocuted, and he was shaking. And Lane was trying to yank the power cable loose, and I took a screwdriver and shorted it, and it blew the screwdriver up, but it got him loose. And I was trying to remember, LaPoma went to the hospital, but he was okay, except that he had a desire to kill the electrician that hooked that frame up in the first place. I would have gotten a medal for that, except that there was 2 of us, and the other thing is he didn't stay in the hospital. So, but that was okay. I wasn't looking for a medal when I tried to help him anyway.
So getting back to your conversion story, you've been a Bible teacher for how long?
Well, as I said, I was training unit director in Albuquerque at Crestview, and most of that was administrative, but some teaching, and that was in '62. Went to Germany in '65, and what we did there is we got acquainted with another guy that was from Georgia who was a Southern Baptist, and we decided we needed to have a church service there. So we went to a beer house that was closed on Sundays and started meeting there. And we'd go around during the Saturdays, we would go around to some of the quarters, knock on doors, and invite people to come to church. So we got a few people coming, and so then we found out that not far away in Germany there was an English missionary pastor sent from the States to minister to Americans overseas. And so we got him involved in coming to preach. And then we moved from the beer house to a German Baptist church, and we met in the basement and taught. We had 2 classes there. I still communicate at Christmas with John Pugh, P-U-G-H, in Minnesota, who was one of the other guys that taught. He had a group and I had a group. So then I came back to Tucson, and I'm trying to remember, Twala remembers better than I do. I think it was 22nd Street Baptist Church. And I didn't teach all the time there, but they had me teach. One I remember distinctly was teaching a group of old folks because somebody wasn't there. And I learned a lot. The old folks knew their Bible. They were committed to the Lord. And they actually, they didn't need anybody for a lesson. They knew the lesson. But we talked about it. That's one of the things that got me to the way I teach. I don't teach lecture, but I communicate with people, and we talk about what it is and what it means and why. So as far as that goes, I guess go back. I was saved in 1955, October 55, in Round Top Baptist Church in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. When I left there, no. Shh, it's okay. I think this guy out there on a skid. Or is he getting the tobacco?
On the skid, he's getting some of the dirt, the fill dirt, and moving it back over there, I think.
Okay. So I taught. Well, we got saved in '55. I didn't do much between '55. Well, I take that back. I didn't do too much until 1957. I was stationed in Yuma, Arizona, and I went with the Church of Christ guy to a Bible study. And I did not agree with the way the teacher was teaching. I don't recall if I was not invited back or if I just didn't want to go back, but I didn't agree with him, so there wasn't much point. I didn't know enough about it to correct him, but I knew what was wrong. So I didn't know the right way to correct him, put it that way. I've taught off and on probably since since about 57, something like that. I haven't always been close to the Lord. And some of that time was in Yuma, when I was in Yuma. Some of the time when I was at Scott Air Force Base, I wasn't always. I was running back home to see a girl. But that didn't work out. God didn't have her in mind for me. Got to New Orleans when I went to work for IBM. Worked in Dallas for a long period of time. As I said, settled down Southern Corporation for the 7-Eleven. Did that with several other customers. When I left here to go to Los Alamos, I had, I think it was 8 customers that only had a CPU for IBM. Everything else was from Memorex or somebody else. But I was managing customers. Walk into Allstate and they'd say, "We got a problem," and I'd say, "It's not this box. Look for it over there." And so I was able to do that. Then we went to Los Alamos, and we put in a new storage device and new processor, CPU. And it was competing with Control Data Corporation because Control Data had most of the other equipment there, but they had problems. I fixed the problems. Got the mass storage installed and got it fixed where it worked. People were happy with IBM after I got there and was there for a little while. My boss came up and said, "Why are you still being a CE? Why aren't you in management?" I said, "I was having fun being a CE." So he said, "You want to interview? I'll get you an interview." And I said, "Okay." So he called me up and said, "You flying to El Paso, you're going to interview with Bobby Long down there." So I flew down there, interviewed with Bob Long. He said, "Well, I'll see about what we're going to do." Went back and he called and said he wants to offer you a job in New Orleans, manager. So we went to New Orleans. Had essentially the same thing. I had Avondale Shipyards. There was a 5'5", white-haired vice president that was very profane and obscene, and thought he was king of the world. So I was able to settle him down, to get him off our CE's back so they could get the work done they needed to do. And Hibernia National Bank, they had a computer down for 48 hours, and they wrote me a letter of thanks because I managed the thing. I was there when they needed me, I was available when they needed me, and I got the right people in to do the job. I got back to Dallas as a tech support manager, and the region manager came to me and asked me, he said, "We're having some problems out at EDS. Can you fix it in a year? Can you get them back up to shape in a year?" I was the tech support manager in Dallas at that time for the region, the Southwest region. I said, "I can do it in 6 months." And he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want a branch. I want my own branch, people working for me." So we went out there, we interviewed, we had problems. I figured out what the problems were, knew what they were. We met and had a meeting with the vice president of IT out there. And he asked me, he said, "And what makes you think you can get this done and get us satisfied?" I said, "Well, one, I now know what the problems are. I know a lot about them myself, and I definitely know the people that can fix them." He said, "Well, what if IBM won't let you fix them?" I said, "I'll come tell you that and I'll quit." He closed the book and said, "Let's go." So I met him one time up at North Texas University, and Danny was getting Dean's Award. And he told me, he said, Pete Mefford, he said, "Tell your son if he's looking for a job, come see me." But he didn't go. He went to work for IBM. So God's good to me before I went in the Air Force. He got me saved in Kentucky by a letter from my uncle to my grandmother. People talk about not having or being on welfare. I've been there. I didn't know it, but Aid for Dependent Children, ADC, in Illinois. Well, from the time I was 11 and a half or 12, when my mother died, I was 11. But from there until I was about 13 or 14, we drew Aid for Dependent Children. I didn't know that, but my grandmother was getting some help there. And then I got a paper route, and then and I was delivering papers in the morning, and one of the places that I delivered, I didn't know when I started, but it was a school superintendent's house, and his wife would, in the wintertime, a couple times, stop me and gave me hot chocolate and cookies. So.
All right, let's go. Let's talk about TWALA. What are some of your fondest memories? Vacations or just whatever you.
Well, one of the things that happened when she was pregnant with Danny, about ready to have the baby, she was watching a television show called The Nurses, and it was a baby was not going to be born right, and so I don't recall the story of the nurses, but I knew she had been watching it. She woke up in the middle of the night, scared, that she was going to have a problem. And so we never watched the nurses again. The other thing I told you about Twala is she called a preacher on me when I was playing penny ante poker. She's independent, but she's good. A lot of guys don't have a wife that'll stand up and tell them when they do something wrong, but she will. And she's not always kind with it either, but I love her. She gave me a son and a daughter, both of which I love very much. I wish the best for both of them for the rest of their lives. I wish my son would get closer to God than he is. And I'm at a point now, I don't know what else I could ask of God, to be honest. He's given me a good wife, longevity, grandkids, great-grandkids. Again, I wish some of them were not as in fractured relationships, but I keep praying. God's healing them. And Twala's a part of that. But Twala's very generous. She would give you the shirt off her back. She want me to get her another one, but she'd give you that one. She takes care of herself, her clothing, her looks, everything. She's very particular. Years and years ago, I found James Avery. I was a customer engineer in Dallas, and I found James Avery Manufacturing Company, jewelry company, and I started getting her James Avery jewelry, and I haven't quit. Still doing it every now and again, and she likes it. That's the thing. She likes the jewelry that they have. It's not gaudy, and it's not something to brag about, but it's jewelry with meaning, usually religious symbols or meaning. I wish there was something that I could do to help her rheumatism, but there's not. God's going to do it, or it won't get done. So she's borne that burden for 40 years. So.
Any other messages, like anything you'd like to say to your either your kids or grandkids that you haven't?
Well, I think I've told all my kids, grandkids, and great grandkids that I love them and I'd do anything I could to help them. My youngest grandkids, of course, have not yet come to know the Lord. That's my prayer that they will. And for my grandkids, same thing. They've made profession of faith. I pray that they would be committed to God and follow His lead. For my kids, the same thing. Now, it's not to say that they aren't, or that none of them are. It's just that I wish the best for them, but I know the best comes from God. And that's what I would heartily tell them, and I do. You know, way back there, when I first got married, I thought that I've got just about everything I want. I've got a family now. And not having a family when I was young may be what caused that. But family means a lot to me. I'm not the only person that feels that way, I'm sure. But, you know, it seems like God put everything in place at the right time, at the right place.
What do you think the world needs right now?
We either need a great revival or we need a return of Jesus Christ. One of the other things about Paula, she encouraged me. I never knew my mother's side of the family. I've known some of my dad's side of the family and still have some contact. In 1961, my dad wrote a letter to my mother's father. And I'm trying to remember when I got a hold of that. He died in '63. I don't think he ever mailed it to me, but what it was a canceled letter from a sheriff up in Pennsylvania talking about the father who had just passed away. So I never got to meet him. But when we found that out, Paula encouraged me to try to get in contact and see. Well, we went back to Kentucky and looked around, found out that my mother's father was from Pennsylvania. I went to Pennsylvania and trying to remember, I think I got his birth certificate and made contact with the family up there. They were glad to see us. My grandfather had told his family up there when he was a rambler. He went all over. He was a carpenter in the oil fields. He built flywheels that the diesels run or steam engines run, and he told his family that he had a daughter. And so Twala and I found the orphanage that my mother was in when my dad found her and got her out. Or actually, that's not, he may have gotten her out, but it was after she'd been out before. A lady named Lethe Bird in Kentucky had her out kind of like a foster parent and helping out. So I've got her driver's license that she first got, found the church that she was saved in, found the person that she ran with that was with her when she got saved. A lot of things that came that helps me to know where she's at and where I'm going to see her again.
So was your grandfather not around?
On my dad's side?
Or which grandmother raised you? Was that your dad's mom?
Yeah.
Okay.
She and my grandfather were married 3 times to each other. Or I think it was 3 times. I don't recall them ever being married in the 12, 14 years I was around them. In fact, I know at one time he was married to another woman. So they had the house on the front part of the lot, and they had a house on the back part of the lot. My grandfather lived back there, but he built it and made it out of a garage. He made it living quarters. So the thing I remember about Papaw Brown is that Papaw was a wino. He never bothered anybody, never argued, never fought with anybody. And when people would get to fighting or arguing, I can remember him saying, "Peace, people, peace." So that's one of the things. I don't like arguing and fighting either. Now, I haven't really said it on here. We've talked about my dad was incarcerated. The whole facts of the matter is that he developed a disease called Raynaud's disease. It's a disease of the blood vessels that they lose their ability to dilate and contract. So if they contract and you don't get blood flow through them, then you have a problem with decaying and pain. The doctors, he went to Mayo Clinic in Chicago, or Heinz Hospital in Chicago, had nerves clipped in his back. They didn't know what Raynaud's was. They knew what it was. They didn't know anything to try to help it. Doctors told my mother and my grandmother that at a point in time, morphine and diluted would not stop the pain, and he would go insane. And he'd probably, if there was people around, he'd harm the one he loved the most. And he shot my mother. She was getting ready to go to work. She was in the bathroom, and he came to the bathroom door and shot her. He was probably not, well, at least from here to the fireplace from her. So, 32 nickel-plated revolver. At any rate, he went on trial for murder. They found him criminally insane. So he went to jail, and later a lawyer got him out on a writ of habeas corpus. The doctor said he was okay. They amputated parts of his fingers that were dying anyway. They were decaying and they were getting gangrene, so they amputated them. Or part of them. I don't think he lost a whole finger on any hand, but he lost some on both hands. You got him out on writ of habeas corpus, and he came back. He also was an alcoholic. I can't say that my mother's death caused any more problem because he was an alcoholic before, but it definitely didn't help. He carried the guilt with him. When I came back from Canada, I was supposed to be assigned to Coos Bay, Oregon, and I wrote and got a deferment and got stationed in Albuquerque because he was coming out there to try to live, and I was going to try to see if I could help him not drink. Didn't work. And he went back to Illinois. He was a welder, and he could weld. Even with the amputations and everything, he could weld if he stayed sober, but he couldn't. But anyway, he went back to Illinois, and that was before I met Twala. So sometime after I met Twala, well, not sometime, in 1963, I got notified by an aunt back there, or cousin, that he had passed away. So he had a heart attack. The same kind of heart attack that my uncle had and my cousin had, and if I had gone on, I would have had. I had open heart surgery, and both pulmonary arteries off of the aorta were blocked, more than 70%. And so I had open heart surgery, or bypass surgery, and then one of the bypasses 2 years later was stopping up, or getting stopped up. So went in and did a stent on one of the originals. But if I hadn't done that, and that's about my wife. I went to the doctor because I had kind of felt like a fluttering that I wasn't used to. I've had pains before, and I can't remember the name right now, but there's a name of something that when you, there's a lining from your lungs and your heart and stuff, and if you get a pain because they're dry or something. And I've had that before, but what I had was different, and I don't remember where Twala was, but she wasn't home when I felt it, and she called me and said something, and so I was honest and told her I had that, and she said, well, you make an appointment with the doctor. God was in that plan, because years before that, I had met a doctor one of our guys at church, when we were going to play golf, was having a heart attack, and we took him to the emergency room, and we met the doctor that came in to take care of him. And he said, "Have you prayed with him yet?" And we said yes, and he said, "Pray with me." So we did. And I told Twala, I called her after Bill Lawson was the guy's name, and after they got him started taken care of, I called her and told her to go get his wife and not tell her for sure what was going on, but that they needed us over there at the hospital. Anyway, I told Twala, that's the doctor you take me to if I have a heart problem. And he's a cardiologist, he's not a surgeon. But I went to see him, got a stress test, and I heard the nurses talking. I said, I thought I heard what they said, and I said, well, doesn't everybody have a little bit of murmur? And they said, oh yeah, but Dr. Isaac will talk to you. So Isaac came in, and he said, we got a problem. We got a couple of ways we can do it. We can run a couple of different tests, or we can run a cath. But if the other two tests don't show us anything, we're still going to do the cath. Now, if one of the other tests shows us something, we won't have to go any further. So I called Twala. I walked over to the hospital, his office across from the hospital. I walked to the hospital to see someone else who was in the hospital, and on the way back, I called Twala because I didn't move my car. And I called Twala, and she said, you make the appointment. So I made the appointment, and he went in and did the cath, and I was still in there. He came out and told them, my brother was here, and my wife and everybody, came out and told them, said, I can't stent this because both of them are blocked. If it was one, I could do it, but not both. So we made an appointment with another doctor, a surgeon, and that surgeon was L.L. Brown. So we went in to meet him, and he was probably about my height, a little stockier, and wore cowboy boots. And he had recently come back to practice there at Wilson and Jones. He had left, and I asked him, I said, so are you like L.L. Bean? You got a catalog I can choose from? He said, no, we do this my way. So I thought I'd like that. I asked him about, who's going to be on duty on the weekend, and he said me. And I said, what about the nurses? He said, they're my nurses. They work for me, not the hospital. He chooses them, is what he said. So anyway, we got the heart surgery done. And I didn't know also, while they were in there, the aorta tore. But they were able to repair that and then do the 2 bypasses, which I got the scars. And then 2 years later, he had to go in and stent one of the original arteries because one of the bypasses was blocking up. So, but that same thing, they call it the widowmaker. You drop dead. When they're both blocked, you drop dead. And so that's what my uncle, my cousin, and my dad, all in their 40s, had experienced. And I was in my 50s and did not. So somebody up there named God likes me.
So to some extent, you were able to reconcile with your dad.
I did. I'm not certain. I'd lie if I told you for certain that I told him to his face, but I think I told him that I forgave him for killing my mom, because I don't think he knew he was doing it. I do think he loved her. Of course, now you hear stories of when you're around them like that. You hear stories. Somebody said, well, she was getting ready to go to work, and he asked her if she's coming home, and she said no. She thought he was saying, are you coming home at all? She was answering, I'm not coming home for lunch. So I don't know if any of the truth of any of that. I do know she was in the bathroom. I saw her laying on the floor dying or dead. Alarm goes off.
Somebody call him.
Oh. So anyway, he never got to see his grandkids. So, well, Danny was born in 62, so, but he never got to see him. He died in 63. And I visited his grave, my mother's grave, a couple of times. My brother and I put a marker on my mother's grave because it didn't have one. My dad's sister in Milford put a marker on his grave and buried him up there. So,
In Milford,
Illinois,
Illinois.
about 37 miles north of Danville.
So at what point did you know that it was, when did you find out that his actions were due to his condition?
I'm not sure of this, but I'm thinking that I began to hear that with my uncle and my grandmother talking. And it may have been my grandmother relating it to my uncle, his brother, the one that was in Kentucky. So anyway, that's and I, you know, I don't have any living proof of that, or I don't know who I would even ask. I don't know the doctor said he was seeing in Danville. But I do know that they had him on morphine and diluted. And diluted is stronger and more habit-forming than morphine. I don't guess it's as good as fentanyl, because fentanyl will kill you, but so will the other stuff. But the fact that I found out about, or thought that I had heard about, doctors telling them that, probably remained in the back of my mind until I was older. But in fact, my memory tells me that, it's like the red, white, and blue room is the bathroom, and I was laying on a couch that was about where this fireplace and chair are. And I heard the shoot 2 shots. And I got up and went in there, and I went in the bathroom. He wasn't standing there then. I went in the bathroom and saw my mother laying there. And I turned around and went in front of him, and he was sitting down holding the gun. And I said, "You killed my mother, you son of a bitch." I remember that all my life. But I didn't have, and he never responded at all. I mean, there was nothing. He's just sitting there. And I think my uncle was living, they had, the way that house was arranged, back there was another bedroom and living room and stuff. And they had a path to the bathroom too, through a couple of doors. So I think he came in that way and saw her and saw my dad, so I don't know. After I said that to him, I know I got run out of the room. That's all I remember. So. But we wrote a couple times to him. I don't remember talking to him after he left and went back to Illinois. But I think I did write a letter, or we wrote letters, but I probably don't have them.
I guess you're absolutely right that God has been a part of your life for a long, long time. He's been watching out for you, taking care of you.
Even more than that. When I was in school at Garfield, I can remember one guy that his dad was a lawyer, and I think Terry kind of thought he was better. He was a little bigger than me, but anyway, he was riding home on a 10-speed, and that's pretty ritzy for back in the 50s. And he rang a bell or yelled at me and said, "Get out of the street, I'll run over you." I grabbed his basket and flipped him over. And I'll remember that for a long time too. Because I wasn't going to back down from anybody, didn't care. I cried at my mother's casket. I didn't cry again for 5 or 6 years. Not another tear. Got smacked in the mouth, busted my lip. Didn't cry. But God has softened me. And I'm thankful. And if I live another 20 years, I'll still be thankful. If I don't live another 20 minutes, I'll be thankful. It's just, you look back, you don't recognize things that happen at the time that they happen. But it isn't just since my mom died that he's taken care of me. You know, he's been there some way, somehow, directing my path. And Scripture tells you he does. But you don't always read that before. That's a good girl. Good girl. So have you put all this on tape for you? Your life?
Have I? No, I haven't.
You should.
I'm going to start now. You're the first, and I'm going to continue to do. So we good?
Yeah, I'm fine.
All right.
Next time you have another 2 or 3 hours, I'll probably fill in some blanks.
Yeah. There's always more. I know that. But I'll try and get Twala and then move on from there and get the older people first, because thinking back, I wish I had my grandparents or Jack or Wesley, my dad or my brother, although I did get that interview with my brother a couple years ago.
That's good. Well, and I've got papers on kinfolks on both sides of the family, and I really need to get them documented digitally. And I don't know, I got my niece is doing some. I had a website, but I didn't expand it, so I've run out of space on it. And I need to go ahead and pay a few bucks and get expanded. No, be good girl. Hey, no, be good girl. Be good girl. That's my girl. Good girl. So, if I do that, I'll give you access to it. My Heritage or something like that.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. And if there's anything else you can think of, let me know, and we'll.
Well, I could probably think a million things, but
Yeah.
sometime you gotta quit. You gotta go eat dinner.
You can only do so much.
Yeah. Chrissy's a good girl. You're a good girl.
That's going to be my motto is just do your best with what God gives you.
Yeah. Well, see, I was going to be a draftsman. When I was in the service, I found other draftsmen that were alcoholics. And I don't know if it was in electronics I found alcoholics, in drafting I found alcoholics, in training I found alcoholics. I drank a lot, but God protected me some way. He kept me from going to jail or getting in trouble. And when I was doing it, I wasn't thinking about God. So, but I can tell you, He does forgive, and He's merciful and gracious. So,
Amen. All right.